Joined now by Jeff Paterson, our Canucks reporter, of course, the host of Rink-Wide Vancouver. And Jeff, we're going to start with our poll question and talk a little bit about the Canucks vis-a-vis these two Stanley Cup finalists. But they had won Game 6 or Game 7. Would they be in the Stanley Cup Final now against the Florida Panthers?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose we're at that stage where it's fair to ask and play the what-if game. And, you know, with Thatcher Demko, with Brock Besser, Carson Soucy got suspended for a game in there with a power play that went sideways on them. Elias Pettersson not showing up. Like, I mean, there's lots of ways to suggest that, yes, I mean, Vancouver Canucks, really all they needed was to find a way. And you go back through the series and even Game 4 when they tied it up at 2 and should have been able to get it to overtime and kind of took their foot off the gas and lost that one. So lots of opportunities. I will say, though, if we're going to play the what-if game, I think you have to recognize that Nashville could probably play the what-if game as well, right? Like any team that gets eliminated, but Nashville, what if they had won a home game against the Canucks? What if they hadn't let them off the mat? What if Colton Sissons had scored instead of hitting the post in the empty net? So you always look back and you lament the opportunities that were lost, but ultimately playoff hockey is about performing when the lights are brightest. And the Vancouver Canucks had 2 kicks at the can there to eliminate the Edmonton Oilers. They couldn't do it. Would they be in the Stanley Cup? Who knows? I mean, parallel universe stuff, I have trouble wrapping my head around that. I was a little disappointed in the Dallas Stars that they didn't put up a better fight. Now, full credit to the Edmonton Oilers, particularly the top end of their lineup, their special teams, and the Canucks saw all of that over 7 games. But just the way that the Dallas Stars won the Western Conference with depth scoring, with terrific goaltending, 1 through 6 on defense, and for whatever reason, the Dallas Stars just didn't look like the regular season Dallas Stars to me in the games that I watched, and I watched most of that series. So, again, I don't know that I can sit here and say, yes, absolutely, the Vancouver Canucks would have steamrolled the Stars and have been in the Stanley Cup Final now, but it is fun to look back and look at all the different ways that things might have gone had the Canucks been able to eliminate.
But the Stars got power played and McDavided it, if that can be a term. Both Draisaitl and McDavid shone in the series, and of course, most particularly on the power play. So, in the late stages, at the very least, I don't know that the Canucks would have done that necessarily to the Dallas Stars. I mean, the 10 shots in this deciding game obviously indicates that the Stars were the better team on the ice, on the judges' cards, but that's not how they measure it. I still wonder if the Dallas Stars look more like Game 6 and outshoot the Canucks like they did and win a lot of those games, especially if there's still no Thatcher Demko at that point.
Yeah, and look, it's tough to win in the playoffs. I think we all have been around this game long enough to recognize that. The Dallas Stars, a team that was built on the backs of some veteran players. A 39-year-old Joe Pavelski had 1 playoff goal. Jamie Benn, I thought, got quieter as the playoffs went along. Ryan Suter was starting to show his age, and as good as Chris Tanev was for them in the first couple of rounds, Chris Tanev, and clearly wasn't at 100%, but is Chris Tanev ever at 100%? But I thought he ran into some troubles as well. And so, some of these veteran guys that had given them great mileage and great service during the regular season, then, of course, they went out and spent assets to get Chris Tanev. Some of that seemed to catch up to the Dallas Stars as well, and the team that had 8 20-goal scorers, I think, over the course of the regular season. They just couldn't spread their offense around. Now, yes, they outshot the Oilers, but we've seen that a lot in these playoffs that, at 2-0, the Oilers didn't need another goal. It was on Dallas at that point to mount a comeback, and protecting leads has been a bit of an issue for the Edmonton Oilers through the playoffs. Yeah, the Stars got 1, but they couldn't get the second one that they needed. And so it is wild to think, like, the Canucks beat Nashville with 12 shots. Edmonton beat Los Angeles in the opening round with 13 shots. Was it 10? Was that the final total last night? I think it was. So, teams, I think, are better prepared than ever to defend, and it is living dangerously, and it's not always pretty, but ultimately, if you get that second goal and, build a bit of a cushion, I think these teams think that they can see these games through, and ultimately the Edmonton Oilers were able to do that, and they're on to the Stanley Cup Final.
Jeff, the Tanev comment has me thinking, because maybe, a performance like that sort of calms people's minds a little bit when it comes to signing him as a free agent this summer. But I had this thought independently as well over the weekend of, it feels like forever since the Canucks were eliminated. And in this market, of course, we're chewing on the Hronek and Zadorov numbers every single day, and Lindholm to some degree as well, because it's fresh in our mind. And so their contributions in the playoffs are still fresh in our minds here in this market. But league-wide, it's been a long time. Do you think that those playoff performances start to wane in terms of whatever bump we thought they were going to get on July 1st? Do you think that starts to wane here as time goes by?
In Zadorov's case, I don't. I think he elevated. I mean, they just 6'6", 240-pound defensemen don't grow on trees, and I think that the league's so heavily scouted now, regular season, and then the focus is even greater on the teams that are around come playoff time. So I think a performance like Zadorov, there isn't a team out there that wouldn't think, hey, we could use that. Now, price comes into it, obviously, and we'll see where the numbers go for the Canucks. They've still got time here to figure things out before the market opens on July the 1st. But I think that kind of performance, and look, I mean, the intangibles are there, right? Like big physical finish checks, but then added an offensive component as well that I don't think a lot of us were expecting, that we didn't really see in the regular season, although this is a guy that got into the mid-teens in goals in Calgary. So it's there in him, but it just seemed to bring out the best in him over the 13-game run in the playoffs. So I think that he attracted some attention if teams weren't fully sure what he's all about, and he's been at this for a while. The Canucks are his fifth stop. But I do think that his timing was perfect, heading to unrestricted free agency, whether he does resign with the Canucks or whether he shops himself on the open market. I think that was a pretty good sort of legacy playoff run for him, even if it was just 13 games, to rise to the challenge at that point, knowing that there are going to be several suitors out there. And really, it just takes one to meet his price on the open market.
This probably applies more to the Florida Panthers, Jeff, because when we look at how the Edmonton Oilers were built, of course, there were all those first overall and top 10 picks. But when you look at this Stanley Cup Final, are there lessons to be gleaned for the Vancouver Canucks in terms of roster construction or in terms of style of play?
Well, I just don't think Bill Zito probably gets his due. This guy took over in 2020, and here it is 2024. They've been to back-to-back Stanley Cup Finals. Now, had things played out the way they were supposed to for this historic Boston Bruins team in the regular season last year, they would have eliminated Florida in the first round, and we wouldn't maybe be heaping such praise on the Panthers. But credit to them, they didn't go quietly. They found their way and ultimately were able to get to the final before coming up short. But I just think Bill Zito, maybe Columbus should have endeavored to keep him in the fold there as they look for a new hockey boss under Don Waddell. But the Matthew Tkachuk trade was a masterstroke of timing. You had to roll the dice, obviously. You had Jonathan Huberdeau coming off a 115-point season, but it was pretty unlikely that he was ever going to get back to anything close to that. And Mackenzie Weegar was a good player, but they saw an opportunity to get a guy that they felt could be an absolute difference maker who wanted out of Calgary and wanted a fresh start elsewhere. And so, some luck enters into it, timing. But when all those things present themselves, ultimately, you got to be willing to pull the trigger on a massive trade like that. So I think he's done a nice job of reshaping the top of the lineup, but also filling out of the fringes, and even a guy like OEL to provide depth. And remember too, at the start of the season, guys, both Aaron Ekblad and Brandon Montour were out of the lineup. Like Oliver Ekman-Larsson started the season playing 25 and 26 minutes. We knew that wasn't sustainable, but he has fallen into his spot. They kind of lucked into Gustav Forsling. Why it worked out for him in Florida, where it did. Like a team like Carolina doesn't let those types of players get away, but Carolina did. Obviously, the Canucks traded him away. He was in Chicago, but he has found himself and had found his game and clearly found a home there in Florida. But it's fascinating, and I don't know if you saw the graphic the league put out, that first time in NHL history that the top 4 picks from a draft class are going to meet in a Stanley Cup Final. And you're looking at Aaron Ekblad, you're looking at Sam Reinhart, Leon Draisaitl, and Sam Bennett, and what a player Bennett has turned into now. It's taken him a while to become the player that I think everybody thought he was going to be when he was 18-year-old Sam Bennett. Here he is a decade later. But this is to bring it back to the Canucks, guys, and I don't want to go deep here, but just a reminder, when you see that those guys from the top of the 2014 draft class are all playing in the Stanley Cup Final, a reminder of what an absolute bust Jake Virtanen turned out to be as the 6th overall pick. Like the Vancouver Canucks should have a 28-year-old power forward, right winger, a team that needs goals from the wing. This should be a guy that's in his prime in the National Hockey League, and here he is toiling over in some second league in Europe, and obviously had issues that took him out of the National Hockey League. But it just it kind of reminded me of, sometimes, and look, like Bennett wasn't drafted by Florida, Reinhart wasn't drafted by Florida, but Bill Zito's taken some big swings there to bring in guys, and it's worked for them, and here they have another opportunity. The other thing I'll say too, and this drives me batty when I think back to Florida's in consecutive Stanley Cup Finals. That 2011 team, like one and done, one of the best teams never to win the Stanley Cup. And then, we all know the history, but got punted in the next round, in the next year, in the first round by the Los Angeles Kings. The fact that the Vancouver Canucks didn't get a couple of kicks at the can out of that group, that team, all those years ago, that still sticks with me as much as the frustration of losing a Game 7 on home ice to the Boston Bruins. They were President's Trophy winners the next year. Obviously, Daniel Sedin was injured. The Kings were not your sort of run-of-the-mill 8th seed, but the fact that we have seen a bunch of teams get, they build these teams and you get a couple of opportunities, and it just didn't happen for the Vancouver Canucks back in 2011, 2012.
Well, the good news is the good people of Penticton won't let Duncan Keith or his rogue elbow forget about that all these years later. You penned on Nils Hoglander, Jeff, for Canucks Army. Trade bait or too invaluable? Tell us about the piece.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all know the kind of season he had with 24 goals, but come playoff time, he was a healthy scratch for a couple of games, and his ice time dropped by a couple of minutes in the playoffs compared to the regular season. Look, I was disappointed in him in the playoffs. I thought this was a guy that's built for, forget the goals. The goals are great, but I just thought the Energizer Bunny, it'd be a bit of a pain and a pest, and we didn't see any of that. And so I don't know if the stage was too big for him. It wouldn't be the first guy that falls a little short in his first true look at Stanley Cup playoff action. But, I think we sometimes forget he's 23 years of age. He had 13 goals as a 20-year-old, a raw rookie in that all-Canadian division, coming over from Sweden. He had played the first half of that season in the SHL and made the jump, new country, all these new surroundings, weird environment. And he made that team out of training camp and was good. And then there were a couple of steps back, and it wasn't about his offense. It was always about play away from the puck. Travis Green had issues. So did Bruce Boudreau. Ultimately gets sent to Abbotsford. And, we've learned since that, like, he embraced that. He wasn't happy about being in the minors, but he embraced it as an opportunity to round out his game. Well, he comes back this year, starts in the bottom 6, scores on 10 of his first 40 shots. He got off to this terrific start and earned a promotion, played higher in the lineup, ends up with 24 goals, all of them at even strength. This is a team that needs help on the wings. We know that. But it's also a player that scored at a 20% clip this year, where his career average is 12.5. So, we went through this last offseason with Andrei Kuzmenko, and is there going to be regression, and can he possibly be expected to repeat as a 24-goal scorer? I didn't think that he had great chemistry with Elias Pettersson. They kind of were out of options, and he was scoring as a bottom 6 guy, so why not try him in the top 6? His two halves of the season were almost identical, 12 goals in each. So there was a consistency. It wasn't that he had this great start and then fell off where some others did. He was able to back it up with a decent second half as well. But I think the question is, why did he struggle? Was it related to Elias Pettersson and Ilya Mikheyev? Was it just that line in the playoffs and none of them were going? Whatever the case, I would be wary of trading a 23-year-old who, was a second-round pick. But, guys, he's 7th from his draft class in goals, scored an 11th in points from that 2019 draft class. Like, he has turned into an absolute home run of a second-round draft pick, again, at the age of 23. Now he's got 1 year left on a $1.1 million team-friendly deal. I don't know that he needs to score 24. What if he came back and was a 15 to 20 goal scorer, but rounded out other parts of his game? The underlying numbers this past season were really good. Like, where other coaches had thrown darts at some of his defensive deficiencies, the Canucks controlled play and outscored opponents and did all the things you want them to do at even strength with Hoglander out there. So, I know people say, hey, nice trade piece, and certainly other teams would be interested in a player like Nils Hoglander. I get that, but just keep in mind that if you're trading him out, you got to get something in return that's going to replace some of those 24 goals that he scored.
And they need wingers. Can Podkolzin be the next Hoglander? Do you have confidence in that?
I don't. And I don't want to write Vasily Podkolzin off. I want this guy to turn out to be something more than he is right now. But, he had a pretty good run there down the stretch of playing every night and getting some opportunities and just didn't do anything offensively. And it kind of feels like that offensive switch has been turned off. And, I think this idea that he's going to be a big time point producer and goal scorer at the NHL level, that ship's probably sailed. But then you go back to his draft, and a lot of people kind of warned that, but they liked his all around game. They liked the fact that he's a guy that, could be out there late in games, protecting leads for you. There was a lot of talk of him becoming a penalty killer. If he's not going to have the offensive side to his game at the NHL level, he's 23 now. Like, he's 5 years removed from that 2019 draft. You got to figure out a way to, become a role player then. And I just think there's still a disconnect between trusting him to be a penalty killer at the National Hockey League, and yet the work rate is there. I think the hockey smarts are there. You don't become a 10th overall pick without the high hockey IQ, but at what point are they going to test him and give him that opportunity to be a penalty killer at the very least? And I do wonder if they're not able to retain some of the guys that did some of the penalty killing for them this year. Is that a role that Vasily Podkolzin could take on? But we just haven't seen him put in that position. So as I sit here right now in the offseason, I'm not convinced that that's something that they're looking at, but boy, this just feels like a make it or break it year to me. I mean, 23 right now, they committed to him on that same sort of Höglander contract. So yeah, you hope history repeats itself. You hope that he watched the way that Nils Hoglander responded to being sent to the minors and then returning. But it was just, I was left wanting so much more other than Podkolzin getting out on the ice and, running around and trying to hit guys. Great. But there's got to be a whole lot more to his game than just that at the end of the night.
I think most people would take his rookie year back. 14 goals, 12 assists.
Oh, yeah.
You'd sign up for that now.
I mean, Jeff Alvin mentioned it as end of year presser. It's not something we've dug into with you all that much since, but like he said, we want to make opportunity for some of your young players. Like who? Like which young players are ready to step up here? Do you have faith that any of these young players are a bona fide Vancouver Canuck
They
NHL
talk about
regular,
Max Sasson a lot.
NHL regular for next year?
An NHL regular? No. I mean, I think we're still wondering, is Nils Höglander an NHL regular? And if so, what does he bring to the mix that others don't? And I guess it would be some penalty killing utility. But no, I know they're high on Max Sasson, and that's great. But do I see him ready to step in? Like if they can't retain Elias Lindholm, I don't think they've got a replacement waiting in the wings. And this is another part of the story, guys, that I go back to Jake Virtanen references in the same episode. I apologize. But, you look at the last 10 years, right? I mean, absolutely crushed it with Quinn Hughes, Elias Pettersson as a first rounder, and Brock Besser. But we're talking about 10 years of the draft now. We just talked about Podkolzin. He's not a sure thing National Hockey Leaguer. We know about Virtanen and Olli Levy. But the other thing, too, is like I think now we're starting to see that trading away 4 first rounders here in the last 5 years, like that is starting to catch up with them. We'll see what happens with Lekkerimäki, obviously, and Höglander will give him every opportunity. But, the trading away a first for JT Miller, that worked out for the Vancouver Canucks. But beyond that, I mean, they gave away the first that became Dylan Guenther to Arizona, and Guenther looks like he's going to be a heck of a player and already is a goal scorer at the National Hockey League level. They took the first they got from the Islanders and flipped that to Detroit in the Hronek deal. And then another one goes out the door here to Calgary this year in the Lindholm and Kuzmenko trade. So, I mean, when I look at what they've got in the system right now, Podkolzin, Archie Bains is a nice story, and I'm not giving up on him, but he didn't really move the meter in the 2 opportunities that he got. Like he looks like he might be a tweener there. And then beyond that, like Aatu Räty, he was playing wing at the end in Abbotsford this year. So I'm not even sure where they see him and kind of where they've got him slotted within their own organization. But the bottom line in all of this is Lekkerimäki a winger and Höglander a defenseman. You've peddled 4 first rounders, as I just documented there, and they really don't have much down the middle out in Abbotsford.
Last question from me, Jeff. Saravelli joined on Friday, and he didn't think there was much of an appetite from the Canucks in terms of moving on from Filip Hronek. What's your sense there? Do you think, as much as we're talking about it, that management is just forging forward with their top pair right side guy, or could you see some movement with Hronek this summer?
I think ultimately they will find a way to retain Filip Hronek. This is an organization that for the better part of 50 years has been looking for a legitimate stud right side guy, even without the pairing of Quinn Hughes, just a guy on the right side that can do the things that Filip Hronek has done. I go back to the question that I posed to him, and I don't want to relive that, but he has to figure it out. They've got to figure it out. And maybe it is as simple as an arm injury that he didn't want to discuss. But he was a different player in the second half. Like, what happened? Where did that go? Is he a close to 50-point guy? Is even a 40-point on the regular if they lock him up long-term here? Or, is he a 20 to 25-point guy that was just overcooking in that first half of the season? And, he wasn't alone. A lot of guys benefited from the fact that a bunch of pucks were going in, and a 10-goal win in San Jose and an 8-1 win on opening night. We know that they rode the PDO machine there in the first half. And I think a guy like Hronek was a huge part of that. Now, he's a defenseman, right? So first and foremost, it's, how does he defend? What can he do on a pairing with Quinn Hughes? And I think we saw glimpses of that and long stretches of that, in fact. And I'm sure Quinn Hughes wants him to be back. Quinn Hughes didn't get to 92 points on his own. A lot of that was that when that pairing was out there in the regular season, they absolutely tilted the ice in the Canucks' favor. So you gave up a lot to get him. You always knew that he was going to be a restricted free agent with arb rights, and that this day would come where it's going to cost them. But at the same time, a 26-year-old right shot guy who could be a 40 to 50-point defenseman for a bunch of years, like, that's a commodity that you do want to keep. I hope for the organization, and I hope they've got the information they need to figure out what happened there in the second half and into the playoffs, because let's be honest, he wasn't very good. There were a handful of guys that weren't good enough come playoff time. But I think, when you look at the body of work here, he is the kind of player ultimately that you want to keep, that you want to continue to build around, but it's going to come at a significant cost. I don't think he's going to be able to get to the 8s for all the talk that's out there. I mean, that's negotiation. That's all part of the dance. But, he's not going to come cheap, and they're not going to get much of a discount. And he's got an agent in Alan Walsh that, plays hardball, and that's the way this whole thing works as well. So, if they commit to Filip Hronek, and I think that they're going to, that is going to force them then probably to walk away from some of the other guys that play, the fans perhaps would prefer that they keep, but you can't get everybody under the salary cap, especially when you got the OEL money on the books and going up here for the next couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
No, Jeff, we got plenty of off-season grist for the mill here, and we will talk about it as we go forward. Have a great week. Catch up next week.
All right, guys. Thanks.
Hey, everybody. If you're enjoying what you're seeing here, then follow along with Sekeres and Price on YouTube. I promise